All right, guys, we are back. Post Christmas, New Year's time of year, and got a topic that I'm going to bring to you guys today that I've been, I don't know, looking for somebody without actually seeking the person out, and we just have a great topic that I think is going to help a lot of guys, you know, be a little bit clear about where they want to be going forward, and give you guys some tools to uh, just really be better dads and also kind of be able to connect with other guys who have gone through some stuff and have some father wounds out there. So over the years, I've met guys that you can see their like actions that they take are, sometimes like don't match up to who you know them as. But when you go back to them, as a child, you're like, oh my gosh, the reason why this person had this violent reaction was because, or this negative reaction, or this anger outburst, or this, and, even though, anyway, you guys know where I'm going with that. So with that said, we have got a fantastic kind of subject matter expert. And also I love the fact that I already said she, so she is a woman. No surprise there. But often we've got guys as guests. But G dang it, I practiced this to get it right. Gigi Dennard. Tell us how you really say it.
Gigi Dennard.
Oh, you're so good at saying your name.
Uh, small victories.
Yes, yes. So, uh, you've got master's degrees and Howard and JD, attorney degree from Stanford Law, and you've been working in this field forever. And your background is also one where you didn't have a dad in your home. You didn't know your dad for 17 years. So
Correct.
you're, right there with a lot of the guys that I talk to and a lot of the guys that listen to this. On the flip side, a lot of guys are like, well, hey, that's not me. Like, I had a great dad that was at the house, or I had a dad that was around all the time, or whatever. But some of the topics we're going to cover today are going to, speak to all the guys that are listening today, all the dads that are listening today. So you have a really, really cool book out there called Hungry for Wholeness, a call to pursue healing and restoration in your father-child relationship. And you do workshops on that as well. So
Correct.
let's jump in. Let's jump in. Tell
Absolutely.
tell us anything I missed, or how you wanna say hi to the audience.
I'm so delighted to be here, Dan. Thank you so much. This is clearly such near and dear to my heart, both from a personal experience as well as I think just, a mission that to which the Lord's assigned me. And I think somewhat born out of that experience, as you mentioned, I didn't meet my dad until I was 17. And that was fraught with all kinds of things that were missing in my development as a young lady and created havoc. And Of course, while you're in it, you may or may not realize the impact, right? And quite frankly, even sometimes when you have a father present, sometimes there are things going on that it's what you know, so it's normal and it's natural for you, but it still may not be healthy in some ways. And so I try to help both on the father side and on the child side, help people identify those areas where maybe your father wounds are still impacting you. I think that's the other thing. A lot of times we don't understand that it if it's not dealt with, it continues to impact you. It impacts your relationships with spouses. It impacts your relationships with your kids. It impacts your relationships often, particularly with men, with authority figures at work. You know, it impacts relationships with pastors often. I've talked to so many pastors who find men who had troubled relationships with their fathers have difficulties uh dealing with the authority of a pastor and what that really means in your life and shepherding because they didn't have that and they don't know that and it feels weird and all kinds of things that happen. So So it's a far reaching kind of thing. And it's, I feel like in the church, it's way too little talked about. And so as a result, we just keep doing things. We keep having children and raising children with what we know, but not really necessarily understanding the God's heart about fatherhood, and then how to break free from some of these things that have been keeping men in chains, unwittingly. Not even men with the greatest heart's desire to change, a lot of times just don't have a picture of how. Like, how do I do that? How do I change these behaviors? And it's really an inside out work. And that is another, sometimes a barrier, you know, um, that is not in Western society as common for men to be brought into this place of inside work.
Okay.
Um,
Uh, use the term inside work. Probably most of the guys get it, but expand on what you mean
okay,
by
so what I
that.
mean by, a lot of times guys will focus on changing behaviors, which would be outside work.
Okay.
You want to fix a problem. Men,
Yes.
most
Yeah, we
men
want to fix
naturally
it.
tend
Like,
to be fixers, right?
yes.
So they want to fix a problem, but they're also more externalizers. They relate to their external environments more. So they will want to fix a behavior and not understanding that because the inner work, that soul piece, their mind, will, and emotions are wounded and not healed. And so you just can't slap a new behavior on. You might for a short period of time, but it can't last because the foundation is really the inside. How do I identify in my mind? How do my emotions track when these kinds of things come up, right? When you don't, and men aren't typically brought into that space often, where it's like, okay, what are you feeling for real though? And did you even notice that you got really angry a minute ago? Did you see that? Do you have any idea like why you did that? Because like you said, a lot of times you see men, you know them, you're in fellowship with them, and then you see this behavior that looks like it comes out of nowhere. Well, it didn't. It's been sitting on that emotion, that inner peace, that inner place all this time. You just had an opportunity to see it released. And unfortunately, sometimes it get released at home behind closed doors. You don't see it in church. You don't see it at the men's fellowship. But their kids are saying it.
Yeah.
Their wives are saying it, and nobody's calling them to say, okay, come on, let's work on this from the inside out. And that's what I want to do. I want to help. Let's work on this from the inside out. And I started out by saying, women are more wired that way. And so it's much easier for me, for women to identify with, okay, that really hurt me, and articulate it and be okay articulating it. That may not be comfortable for a lot of men. You know, I listened to one of your podcasts and I think he was great. And I agree entirely as he was talking about strength, as a character, or encourage, as a character that really describes what manhood is about in from God's perspective. But what that gets translated into though is often missed, right? So that means courage means that I don't get hurt, or that somehow if I felt hurt, that's some weakness on my part, and I'm not strong, and that's not true. And so part of it is breaking down those lies, breaking down those myths about what some of that manhood looks and feels like, and it is not detached from your emotional and psychological experiences. And so they have to be in alignment. Your behaviors won't be in alignment with the word when your heart and mind aren't in alignment. with God's heart as a father, and getting to that place and being able to identify, okay, I can see how and why this triggers this response in me. And actually taking them, walking them back through some of their experiences so that they can identify. So where did that all begin? You know, since when did I feel that? You know, and a lot of times there's this wounded little boy on the inside who just grew up into adulthood and nobody ever helped them heal. And so they carry that woundedness into their future.
So we could have grown up with dads that were absent. We could have grown up with dads that were like
Present.
ultimate present but ultimate disciplinarians, like crack the whip and
Right. The authoritarian type, you know, my way
yeah,
or the
yeah.
highway, you know, because they don't understand that authority, God's authority, is filled with compassion. You know, when we look at God's heart, you know, the story of the father and the prodigal son story, you know, that's God's heart on
Mm.
display as a father, right? But that father had compassion on this wayward son who had, you know, disrespected, disregarded. You know, a lot of times men want to be respected. They don't understand that part of manhood is being respectful,
Mm.
being respectful of your wife, being respectful of your children. That doesn't mean they run over you, but it means that you respect them as human beings. You respect them as the fact that they might need some further understanding. They might, you know, they might they might need something different than just a, you know, directive. Um, and so we confuse sometimes, you know, authority with being authoritarian, which is really different.
Very different, very different.
Very different.
You brought up the word respect.
Yes.
Women and
Divine
men are
point.
different.
Correct. Yeah,
No crazy talk there, at least not on this
exactly.
podcast.
Not on this podcast, thank God. Yes.
And talk about men and respect. And
Respect,
I don't
sure.
know if you've got a women's like
Equivalent.
equivalent or even perspective
Perspective.
or
Yeah, perspective for sure.
where that difference, like anything in that realm, because that word respect
That's a big issue.
really is a big deal.
That is a big deal. So yeah, let me start with saying that uh it's so hilarious. I was actually listening to somebody else's podcast earlier today, and she was talking about submission. The whole podcast was about submission and authority. And they were talking about it from a biblical perspective. And so when God talks about wives respecting their husbands, for instance, that's a big deal. First of all, I think in this time, day, and age, women don't get that. They don't get that that's a really, really big deal. Like, don't take it lightly. So I think a lot of times, based on either their own experiences, what they've seen, what they've been taught by mothers or other women in their lives, what they've seen in media, media has just trashed the concept of respecting men, respecting
Yes.
fathers. I mean, just completely, it's in the toilet, right? So, I have witnessed uh mothers, wives disrespecting their husbands in public in the grocery store. And as a result, their kids do the same, right? And and part of it is because they really don't understand that that men are hardwired for respect in a lot of ways, the same way that women are hardwired to be nurtured and protected.
Hmm.
And and so, what I see that disturbs me is that a lot of times women want men to step up. There's this thing of step up. you're not being the man you need to be, right? But they don't understand that part of their role as a helpmeet is to respect him into that place. It's something that helps bring out the confidence in men for them to be who they are and lead as they're designed to. And because women often there's this whole dialogue and mantra that tends to make people think that leading somebody means that you're superior to them, which is not the case and not at all God's intent, and has nothing to do with being able to respect somebody. Absolutely nothing to do with that at all. I actually just also wrote a book on leadership culture, and that's one of the things I talk about is that leading is not wielding authority.
Hmm.
And so the same is true in as fathers and husbands, that that respecting men will help bring out the kind of leadership that women are really looking for. Um, and it's like you can't have one without the other. You can't tell him to step up and then dog him,
Right.
in front of his friends. That just doesn't work.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
just that just really doesn't work.
So,
And but I think that if women would understand that it doesn't mean being a doormat. It doesn't mean, lay down and let somebody trample you. It means supporting him, respecting his leadership, seeking his counsel, you know, creating an environment where you communicate to him both by word and deed that you trust him to lead you in this relationship. Um,
so
I think that's
a minute or two ago in my
good.
head, I had hundreds of guys saying, "Tell me how to make her do that. Tell me." Like, standing up in a room and like,
Uh-huh.
and I know we can't make her do that.
Well,
So
in a
one, the
way you
question is
can,
wrong, but
but in
yeah,
a way you can, and that's to do your half of Ephesians 5. So the word says to the man to love your wife. You notice it doesn't say to for the wife to love her husband. I've
right,
always thought that
right.
was interesting. It doesn't say that.
No.
And but because what will happen is if he will love his wife as Christ did and lay down his life for her, as Christ did for the church, I guarantee you she will love and respect him.
Mm-hmm.
It is a symbiotic exchange. Women who do not feel loved will not respect their husbands. I can just tell you that, man. I'm sorry to tell you, it is what it is. Um, Even if intellectually you've got a woman of God who knows, you know, that that's what I'm supposed to do, but it will be very hard for her to do that and sustain it if she doesn't feel loved and protected by that husband. And by that, I mean, you've got to recognize that her heart is precious and you've got to treasure that. And you can't just think you can damage that and, walk away and want your dinner on time. It's just, it's not going to happen. And so the how do I make her do that? You woo her into doing it. You woo her into doing it by loving her and laying down your life. Women who know that, and this is it's interesting because this is also true. I'm just going to interject this for fathers and daughters in particular. I had, I didn't meet my father until I was 17, but my father loved me with just unrelenting love, a passionate father's love. And so I remember telling somebody at one point, I didn't know how to swim. I still don't know how to swim. And my father had wanted to teach me how to swim. And my father swam in the military.
Okay.
So, he was a really good swimmer to be like an African American man who made a swim team.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt.
He was like a really, really good swimmer. But all the other teachers that I'd had, I was afraid. Like I didn't trust them that they cared enough about me to make sure I didn't die in the water.
Hmm.
Like, yeah, I know that's your job, but you might look off and I might drown and then it'll be oops, right?
Yeah.
So I didn't trust that. My brother, although I knew he loved me, he was also extremely playful and played lots of jokes and tricks. And I'm like, okay, you might love me, but you still might accidentally have me drown because you're playing around.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I didn't trust him either to teach me how to swim. But when my dad came along, I was so confident. I told people, there is no way that Bobby Deadweiler will let his baby girl drown. No way. It's that kind of confidence. Like there is no way that my husband is going to leave me hanging. There is no way that my husband's going to let some other man disrespect me. It's that kind of thing.
Hmm.
It's she's got to know that. When she knows that, believe you me, love and respect is coming your way in droves.
It was funny. One time years ago, me and my daughter were going sledding.
Uh-huh.
We went down this big hill. Well, unbeknownst to us, there was a rock underneath
Uh-huh.
the snow.
Ah,
And so we smacked right into that rock and both of us went flying and we end up, are you okay? Are you okay? Dad, how could you let that happen?
right.
You're supposed to protect me.
That's
And
right.
I'm like,
That's
who told you this?
right. I'm
You,
telling you,
you're
I don't
little
know.
bitty.
We get somehow we know that just like out of the womb or something. I don't know. Yeah.
You talk about different types of fathers.
Hmm.
Throw some examples out there for
Okay.
us.
So we talked about the authoritarian. I also want to talk about the apathetic father, which I think a lot of men and women experience today. So, and as one of your guests was talking about, a lot of times, and we were talking about people in my generation, boomers, men were focused on going to work, making a living, and sometimes just trying to make sure that their kids had opportunities, college, etc., that they perhaps didn't have, or that their fathers weren't able to give them, right? And so there's all this focus on providing physically, materially, kind of thing, but not understanding that men are supposed to provide spiritually and emotionally and intellectually in their homes as well. And so you may have had a father who was at home, but was not really there for you, and maybe you guys ate dinner together or something, but didn't participate in listening to you and hearing your dreams and aspirations or spending quality time with you just to hang out, kind of thing, and show interest in you as a son or daughter, and that wounds kids. um and even those that, a lot of times then the child grows up and says, well, I did all right, my dad, did all right by me, he was there, kind of thing. He didn't cheat on my mom, he was there. Okay. And so you think you're okay too, except you're not really, because there were things that a dad is supposed to pour into you to help your development that is now missing.
Hmm.
And so it's not too late to get it, but you first have to recognize that something's missing and that you don't have all that God would desire you to have to then pour into your kids. Another type would be the accusing father. Um, and even though I know we're talking to dads, this might end up being parents. Some
Yeah,
of these,
yeah.
right? This could end up being parents on either side of the coin. I actually did have an accusing mother. So imagine I have an accusing mother, no father, and a mother who was not super on the nurturing end of the spectrum.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and that's kind of her thing, right? Like that should be her thing.
Yeah, but it wasn't. So,
And I know
I
there's a
would
lot of
watch
lot of women
things
out there like that. Like,
exactly. And
not 90% or
no,
95%,
no,
nothing like that,
but
but
way too
yet
many.
it's
Right.
surprising when I run
It's
into a
yeah,
non-nurturing mother.
mother. And so if
Yeah.
you're raising a girl in particular, right? So I'm not getting nurtured by the mom or a dad, right? And so I'm just like collecting wounds,
Mm-hmm.
just constantly collecting wounds. Um, but again, you, you know, particularly where I grew up, women press through. You press through, you push through, you make stuff happen, you do what you got to do. You know, it was that kind of thing, and so I felt like I had to make my own way. You know, and not a lot of guidance because my mother's answer 9 times out of 10 was because I said so.
Mm-hmm.
So questions were not, she was both authoritarian and accusing.
Well, the because I said so is like such a common response.
Yeah.
And this might be putting you on the spot a little bit, but is it ever okay to use that one?
I do think it's okay when there has been ample training beforehand,
Yeah, yeah.
you know, and I think even it's okay if context is added. So I'll give you an example. I was actually with my godson, and we spent a lot of time together, so he knew me, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
He just forgot he was with me for a minute. Um, because his mother in particular, kind of let him do anything and everything. And everybody knew that that was not happening on my watch. And we were
Right.
all good with that, right? He was
Yeah.
good with that. We had lots of fun together. But in a moment, he forgot for a minute. And so we were on the highway. I'm trying to take him somewhere, but I think I'm lost. And there's a police car right next to me. And I want to ask the police officer if I'm headed in the right direction.
Yeah.
So I say to him, roll down the window real quick. And he turns to me and he's like 6. He goes, why? And I did momentarily. I'm thinking, he did not just say that to me. Are you kidding me? And so first I did say because I said so, but I followed it with, and furthermore, if any adult gives you an instruction that is not putting you in harm's way, you need to do it, buddy.
Yeah, yeah.
But again, this wasn't like our first tango, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I wouldn't have said that 2 years ago, but now we've been hanging out for 6 years. I was there when he was born, so we've been hanging out on a regular for 6 years. He knows better. He just temporarily lost his mind.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. On the flip side, I can see being 6 years old and there's a police officer next to me like, what's up? Like what just happened?
right. So, but yeah, but I don't,
Or
it wasn't a
I didn't do
regular.
anything. I'm 6. Like I'm just sitting here like I'm
Right. I'm
supposed to.
just 6 years old, right? But no, it wasn't a regular kind of thing. And I don't think it should be a regular kind of thing. I do think that there's a level of training that you can get kids to. And there's and I think there's probably I would probably say something more like nowadays. I'd probably say something like, please don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
Please don't ask me that kind of question in this kind of context,
Mm-hmm.
and talk
Yeah, and the
through.
tone of voice and that
Yeah,
matters
absolutely.
quite a bit. So
Absolutely. I
it
think that
wasn't the
matters a
words, it
lot.
was the
Right, right,
defiance
right, right.
about it. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Understand. Yeah.
And so, and I think that there is a way to communicate that at times, but I don't think that should be the go-to,
Mm-hmm.
which was the case with my mom. It was just kind of like everything. And even when I would ask questions, like legitimate questions,
Mm-hmm.
I remember getting in trouble once when I was 7. Again, my brother's 8 years older than I am. So we had a very different sense of understanding about things, right?
Right.
And so to this day, I don't know what I said, but apparently I said something to a neighbor about our family that I was not supposed to have shared.
Oh,
Correct. But I'm 7,
right.
right? So whatever it was, I didn't think it was a secret. So my brother told on me and told my mother, Gigi's out here telling our business. I didn't even know what that meant.
Right,
I didn't know
right.
we had business. I didn't know what that even meant. I got spanked and punished because of that. And when I asked her why, like what did I do wrong? It was like, better. Cause and I was like, well, no, not really. That was another one. She would say things like, better. And I want to bring that out to say parents and maybe even husbands and wives sometimes presume understanding on the other person that is simply not there. You think they ought to know better, and therefore you think they do know better,
Mm-hmm.
but they really may not. Again, by virtue of their own upbringing and what might have happened in their worlds, you have no idea. Sometimes you just have no idea things that people have gone through. I this is kind of a gross example, but it's the first one that came to mind. Like I've talked to guys who had no idea that you should wash your hands when you go to the bathroom
Yeah,
because they weren't taught that. And so somebody could easily say, well, you ought to know that. Well, no, because there's no gene that tells you that.
right, right.
Somebody has to teach you that at some point in your life. And if in your growing up, you didn't find that out till you were 26, that's not your fault. And don't be mad at him because he doesn't know that.
I was in the military, and it was funny to see examples of that. Might have been like one of the examples, but like other things of just
Yeah.
normal behavior.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
Right.
what's up? And it was funny to see some like real direct people. Hey, wash your hands, boy.
Right. Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
what was that? Like that quick
Right.
little, but the way they, whoever, that personality style, it's like the other person got it. Like, oh, geez, I'm
Doing
breaking
something wrong here.
societal norms. Like
Right.
I'm crazy. Uh,
Yes.
like a
Yeah.
drill sergeant type.
Right. Yeah.
Puts people back in line real quick. And if they didn't know what line they're supposed to be in, like they're shown
They're
shown
they're
quickly.
yeah. But we don't, from God's perspective, we don't want to shame people into understanding and knowledge, right? And I think a lot of times that's what happens with accusing fathers and authoritarian fathers. There's a tendency to shame kids into submission and obedience, and that's not healthy. That's not God's heart. Um,
Hmm.
there are better ways to do that, is what I'm saying. You know,
Give us a better way.
well, for one thing, the Bible doesn't say rebuke a child in the way they should go. It says train a
Train.
child
Yeah.
in the way they should go. And so training training really isn't yelling at. Training really isn't training involves an exchange. I actually have been a trainer, like professionally.
Right.
I've developed training programs, right? Curricula for businesses and everything. So training involves an exchange. It requires an understanding on the part of the recipient and a validation by the person who's training that they actually understood it. It is not just telling somebody something. Sometimes it's not even just showing somebody something. There are people who think that you can just show somebody something once and walk away and you expect them to remember it. And if it's not something they do all the time, they may not remember that they got shown that once. That's not training. Training means that somebody actually met some objectives and learned something, that something was actually learned that they then know how to apply when they leave this moment of training.
Yeah. In the military, we had tell them what we're gonna do, show them what we're
Yeah,
gonna do, let them do
yeah.
it,
And then,
and then have a debrief, and then
and have a
keep
debrief. That's
keep
right.
cycling through until you
So
get it.
validation is critical in the
Hmm.
training process. Until you have validated that they got it, they don't got it.
Hmm.
And so it's important. So patience is another piece that's, one of those fruits of the spirits that's very important in the practice of training children. When you are, leading boys into being men, this is not a one and done. There is no like give them a book, give them to read it, and they're good. This
Right.
is this is not what that's like. It's a journey, and walking it out with them. You know, it's important for fathers to teach daughters how they should allow men to treat them. That doesn't come from just a conversation, that comes from experience. Fathers, take your daughters out, spend time with them one on one, love them, lavish them, cherish them, let them know that they're incredibly special, that they have immense worth and value. And so that way, when some dude comes along who has no idea of what that means, they will be able to recognize that, oh, yeah, no, that's not something. Yeah, no, sorry, I don't. Yeah, you, you ain't talking to my dad, though. He can
I've
help
got a
you
good
out with this.
I've got a good friend and he shared his 2024 goals, and in that it was take his wife out twice a month,
Mm-hmm,
and he's got two daughters. Take each one of those out once a
mm-hmm.
month.
Yeah,
So he's going on a date with
yeah,
each daughter every month and
yeah.
two dates with his wife. And I'm
It's
like, man, that's
so
so cool
important.
that you've put a emphasis on it. Like it may have
Yeah,
been a thought that you were going to do these
right,
things, and you look
right.
back at 2023 and went, huh, not quite as often as I intended.
Had
And now he's got
intended.
some,
Yes,
design behind it. And he's got his goals, and he's got, these are the dates when these things are going to happen.
happen.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
intentionality, that's
Intentionality, yeah.
another major piece of this. None of this is just going to drop down on you like a cloak. You have to be intentional. You have to be intentional about getting healed. You have to be intentional about becoming the best dad and father you can be.
You
It
just talked
doesn't
about being healed. So what are some of the principles that you use to help?
people
Uh,
be healed.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, the beginning is actually recognizing. That's step one. It's both recognizing the father wounds that you have. It's recognizing how your interactions or lack thereof with your father impacted you because it doesn't look the same on everybody. So, for instance, even somebody who had an absent father, like I was saying, for me as a girl, it led me to promiscuity. Um, Sometimes it has led other girls into being extremely masculine. It has led yet other girls into being incredibly fearful and timid, like constantly,
Mm-hmm.
all the time, just don't know how to escape being timid and fearful. So you've got to, I help people walk through how a process of identifying how did the absence affect me.
Mm-hmm.
And then also look at these five types of fathers and kind of get a baseline for what you were dealing with. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes those work, the exercises we do kind of work hand in hand. And I also help fathers. So I talk to them about what kind of father both did you have and have you been? Um,
Yeah.
what kind of father have you been and what kind of father did you have? Um, and and so we provide a baseline of recognizing what's going on here and how it's impacted you. And then we move into the repent and release cycle. Um, and at that step, we acknowledge. Acknowledgement is real huge. Acknowledge all the negative feelings that you have stored up about this. You may be angry. You may be resentful. You may be hurt. You may be walking in unforgiveness. You may have a real root of bitterness that's, implanted in your heart that you don't know how to break off and uproot. Um, uh, you may be afraid. There are all these kinds of negative emotions that you might be experiencing as a result of whatever experience you had. So we look at that and then we renounce it, we reject it, we do exercises, write a letter. What would you say to this person if you could say everything you really wanted to say, kind of thing. But take people actually through an exercise to repent and release, and talk about the fact that repentance is a choice and a decision. It's not a feeling. So your emotions may not have caught up with you yet today, and that's okay. Again, I take people in a jump start. It's the beginning. And it's a journey. It's not an event. Um, and then I go to step 3, which is receiving, which is receiving God's Father love for you, because I believe that's essential to wholeness and the healing process. And so we look at scripture, we talk about experiences, things that we've seen. I share experiences I've had, things I've watched, how this looks, how this sounds, how this, because a lot of times just reading a scripture doesn't get it. It's kind of like, okay, yeah, the words on that page, I know what they mean, but I have no idea what that looks like.
Mm-hmm.
What does that really look like? So we talk about those things, and walk through exercises again to do that. I also created a 12-week companion diary so that after you leave my workshop, I give you sort of 12 weeks of support by giving you an opportunity to daily revisit one aspect, any of those 3 steps, and kind of focus on, a kind of a guided tour through the
Mm-hmm.
journey for 12 weeks, which can, position people to like really have breakthrough.
Where are some challenges when we get to the step 3, the receiving God's Father love? Where do people commonly say no? I'm not doing that.
It's funny. People don't typically say no. They say, I don't know how. People don't typically reject the idea because
And when I
particularly,
say no, that's what I'm talking about is
oh,
yeah, you nailed it with your words,
okay.
but
Okay. Okay.
resist, resist
Yeah,
the
they
receiving
resist
the
it because they don't, it's unfamiliar. If they have not experienced the love of a father, in particular God's type of love, then then they're kind of like, yeah, I'm good. you know, like, yeah, because they don't understand that, one, you have to replace things when you remove things, because we all have a hole in our hearts that's a God-sized hole that only God can fill.
hmm
And so we're constantly trying to fill it with other things,
hmm hmm
constantly,
Yeah,
all the
all the
time. We're
time,
all
all the
trying to
time.
do that, right? And then we remember, like, oh yeah, that's right. That's not really going to satisfy us. We're going to have to get that from God. And the same is true with love, receiving love, giving love, being able to express God's Father heart. You have to receive it to express it. You cannot pour from an empty cup. And that's frequently the thing that I try to help them understand, that, okay, you say you want this, you want to have this godly relationship with your children. You say you want to be able to pour into your children. You want to be able to lead them as a man of God in your household. You cannot do that. Not that you don't want to, but you're incapable of doing that without letting God pour that into you first,
hmm
because you can't pour from an empty cup. If you don't have it, you don't have it to give.
hmm
And that's usually the breaker, and then it's kind of like, okay, well, how do I do that? What does that look like? You know, and 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 so we talk about identity, being identifying as a son of God. What does that even mean to you? It's about crafting that relationship with God as your father, so that you can even know what being poured into as a son looks and feels like. So then you'll know how to disseminate that
hmm
yourself. You just It's it's really not a complicated concept, but it's so foreign to a lot of men. It's just a foreign concept. Like, what on earth are you talking about?
And I think that may, be the same for women too, huh?
Not as much. Theirs is more having to rid themselves of whatever judgment they had against their dads.
Okay.
But the concept itself, they're looking to be poured into by a father.
Right.
So there's a natural yearning. There's a yearning for that for men too. They just don't, we don't talk about it.
Yeah.
They're not as conscious of it. And they want to be poured into differently. And that's important to understand. They don't want to be poured into the same way girls do, but they want to be poured into too. They want a hero. They want, somebody who's gonna like stand up and show them what it's like to be a man. They want somebody that they can have those tough conversations with as they're growing into young men that unfortunately you can't just start talking to your sons when they're 16, 17
Right.
and expect them to open up to you. If you have not been talking to them when they were 3 and 4 and 5 and 6, it doesn't just magically occur. It's like any other relationship, it takes time and development. So, the fathers, regardless of, because it's not about perfection. I think that's another thing. Guys tend to be a lot more hard on themselves about getting things right. And sometimes it's not about getting it right, it's about the consistency of pursuing it
Hmm.
and being willing to acknowledge that part of courage and manhood also says, and leadership says manning up and owning mistakes. So if you've yelled at your kid because you had a really rough day yesterday, go back to your child and say, hey, you know what, man, I'm so sorry. Yesterday I was out of sorts. I let the job get the best of me. I came home, was not, in the right frame of mind to deal with you and your mom. Please forgive me for that. That's modeling manhood. That's modeling pouring. You know, it's but those conversations have to start like at the beginning.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
unfortunately, a lot of times I think dads think, okay, well, he's 14, 15 now. You know, he's ready to start becoming a man now. I can talk to him. Well, he's not trying to talk to you. You ain't talked to him for the first 13 years of his life. He's talking to his friends. He's not talking to you. And so that's a big part of it. It's like really realizing that as one minister I know put it, fatherhood is from, the cradle to the grave. And it may look different in seasons, but your presence is required at every season. Your actual presence is required. Your active listening is required. Your displaying interest, you know, one of the coolest things, most people I'm sure on this podcast have probably seen Courageous, the
Oh
movie.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's like, that man did not want to run. You hear me? You know,
Right.
he was like, I hate running. And I get that, but at that point, he didn't really have another place to connect with his son. That's the place where the son was reaching out. So he needed to man up and go run.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, I felt for him. I hate running too, but but understanding, and we have tools now that can really help. I know that Gary Chapman's been on your program,
Oh yeah.
and so that's something else that I incorporate as I help people. It's like understand what your child's love languages are. Oh my God, would that have solved much of the heartache that I experienced as a child? Even with all the other things going on with my mom. If I had just understood that, even about myself,
Yeah. Yeah.
that would have relieved me of agony for years because I didn't understand that my mother and I had, in addition to all the other
Wow.
stuff, we also
Yeah.
had completely different love languages.
Right.
So, when I would say stuff like, why don't you, can we watch a movie together and hang out? Because quality time is one of my top two. And she would say yes, but while we were watching the movie, she was ironing clothes and doing something else.
Right.
And I would say, "Come on, I thought you said we are going to watch." She's like, "I'm watching." And to her, we're both in the same room. We're watching
Right.
the same
Right.
movie. For her, she thought she was satisfying what I was asking for. For me, it wasn't at all, but I didn't know how to articulate that then.
Right.
Right. So I'm frustrated because I feel like my mom doesn't want to spend time with me. In her mind, she absolutely thinks she was. Right. So, and then the other one of mine was my primary is acts of service, both in giving and receiving. Right. So here I am. I am 30 years old. I am in an airport for, I don't know, probably the 15th time in my life. My mother is late again to pick me up from the airport. I am crying in the airport. I am 30 years old and crying. Now, intellectually, I'm yelling at myself, going, "You are so stupid. Like, why, after all these years, does this still bother you? Like, she has been late your entire life." So, intellectually, I knew that had nothing to do with my mother loving me. You know, when I figured out what was wrong with me? When I read his book. And I
Really?
realized that acts of service is my primary love language. And that was the thing she fell on all the time. Things like that, like picking me up on time or getting me somewhere on time or helping me do something to it,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, she was not, that was just not a big deal. If whatever, you'll be all right was the response. And every time that happened, that I internalized that as a lack of love. But it wasn't until I was 30 and read the book that I even understood what was going on. And then it was like, oh my God, that's what's wrong with me all these years. What the heck? And then I could see for her, it's gifts. It was gifts and probably gifts and words of affirmation, which are
Hmm.
like my bottom two, right?
Right.
So she's, she's like doing that. She's buying me gifts. And I'm like, gee, that's nice, dear. And
Yeah.
and so those are things that are like important. Dads, learn how to what does your child need? And your children will need different things.
Hmm.
Allow them to be who they are. And you will be amazed at what the joy in the experience you will find as a father will be so much richer, that it will really be the crown that God intends that to be for you as a man,
Yes.
to have a really enriching experience with your kids is amazing.
Yes,
To
it
have the
is. It
opportunity
is.
to do that. When I met my dad, it turns out that I'm so much like my dad, perhaps more than any of his other children. And he's got several. He was married before, and then my mom, and then he was married again. So, um, I've got 8 siblings that I know. And so, maybe 7 I know, one I don't know. And, but out of all of them, I may be the most like him and was the one who really embraced a walk with the Lord. So we walked that together as well.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so we wanted to minister together. So my dad got ill, which is also why I never learned how to swim.
Oh, wow.
Because we were actually preparing for that.
Yeah.
Like the next time, he was coming to wherever he was going to teach me how to swim. He got ill and he passed. And he came to faith in prison, and we wanted to do prison ministry together.
Whoa.
Yeah. And we didn't really get a chance to do that. But the book began by my dad and I writing our stories together. We wrote alike. So the tone and voice and language and everything, that was one of the first things we discovered. He showed me something that he'd written, and I was like, oh my God, this is so crazy. I could have written this. So we
Mm.
started telling our story together. That's actually what it didn't start out as a book to minister to people. It started out as just me and my dad
And you published that
telling
one?
our story. Well, yeah, but what happened
What I'm
was,
asking is people can buy this.
yeah, it's in Hunger for Wholeness. So our
Okay. Okay.
story is now in that book, but it started out just our telling our story. That's all it
Yeah.
was. And then, like, I shared it with a few people, and it really ministered to people. And a roommate of mine who was a professor at Berkeley had me read it to her English class or whatever. And kids are like crying. These are like
Whoa.
college students. I'm like, whoa, what's going on here? It had way more impact than I thought it would to others. And then I met a woman who was actually involved in prison ministry, and she took it with her to the prison. It was just because he talks about, getting saved in prison in the story and
Hmm.
everything. And so then I took it, I came back to DC to visit an old professor and who had been kind of like a surrogate father to me in college. And he read it and he goes, if you like got a few other people's stories and put that together, that could be a really powerful book. I hadn't even considered that. I was like, huh, who knew? Okay. It took 10 years, but eventually that's exactly what I did. And
Wow.
so it actually tells my story and then six other sons, daughters, and fathers.
So in theory, you could have had years and years of resentment and blah blah
Yeah,
blah and all this stuff
yeah,
and fear and anger and whatever. And when we look through it from a biblical lens and realize that our stories, you know,
yes,
God uses all good.
yes,
God uses things for the good. And
yes.
you go through this whole journey and you go, huh,
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what happened. Because afterwards, so as soon as I published the book, that was in 2012, the first publishing, I immediately got thrust into this space of this fatherlessness movement, like immediately. That fall, I ended up being the only female speaker and the opening keynote speaker for the inaugural Father Shift conference in Portland, Oregon.
okay.
And I had the pleasure, and I mean, it's you can only know that God orchestrated it because there is no way. I ended up getting Dr. Ken Canfield's.
Oh yeah, I know Ken.
I bet you do. Yeah.
Yeah.
I hunted him down. I felt like the Lord said, get his endorsement. And I was like, that is crazy. This is a conversation. This is a normal conversation I have with the Lord when he tells me to do stuff like this. I said, that's crazy. This man didn't know me from Adam. I am nobody. He said, find him. So I did. So I hunted him down,
Yeah.
found him. At that point, he was at World Impact in LA. And I said, hey, I've written this book. I felt led to ask you to endorse it. He writes me back and he goes, do I know you? No. Do you work with World Impact? No. He goes, yeah, I don't. He goes, I don't normally do this for people like I don't know or aren't a part of this. And he goes, having said that, I really like your writing. So then he says, do you have a call to action? Yes, but it's for the end. And do you tell, the eternal story? I said, yes, that's closer to the end. I had sent him just the intro. And I
Yeah.
said,
Yeah.
they're very, very rough chapters, but I'm happy to send you the rough drafts of those two chapters. So he told me to send him. So I did. About a week later, he wrote me back and said, you'll have an endorsement by the end of the week. So that was miraculous. Then I ended up getting the endorsement of the new head of the Father Center, National Center for Fathering. And so both of them endorsed the book, right? So that was
Wow.
crazy all by itself. And then shortly thereafter, that summer, it came out, I think in April. And then that summer, I heard from Dr. Canfield, who said, there's this conference I think you should be at. I've already talked to the pastor leading it.
Wow.
And so the pastor called me eventually. I could tell he was kind of like, who are you? And I said, I know. Nobody knows me. I know. But later Dr. Ken told me what he told him. I was like, what on earth? So he told the man there was this new voice in the fatherhood movement and she needs to be at your conference. And, and I was sitting there going, okay, first of all, I didn't know I was in the movement. Second of all, I didn't know I had a voice there. Like what on earth? But I went. Um, Part of me was terrified, but it was so, I knew for sure I was supposed to do it, and I'm in a room with 400. It was packed out. They had to bring in extra chairs in the sanctuary. And I was worried that I wasn't going to be able to talk for 45 minutes. And it ended up going over and over.
Mm.
I only got to one question and they had to like yank me off the stage, cut me, and then we prayed over people. But it was the impact was just phenomenal. And in the middle of that, I knew that this right here, this is what I'm called to do. It was it was like in Chariots of Fire, where he says, when I run, I feel God's pleasure.
Yeah.
That's what it was like. I
Wow.
never understood what that meant until that day. And in that moment, because to be honest, I really couldn't tell you what I said almost. It was like God was speaking through me. I was there, but it was like, this right here is what I was born to do. This right here. This is the heart message. And yes, it was born out of that experience of not having a dad. He used all of that, you know. God is just so awesome like that.
Mm.
And there are so few women in this space, and I think it's important to have women's voices in this space as well.
Yeah. Oftentimes when I run into women and, hey, can I come on your podcast or whatever? It's like, we'll see. We'll
Yeah,
see.
yeah, yeah,
You got to be bringing something. So I
absolutely.
love what you brought to us today, and I love your perspective on things. And thanks for sharing all
Thank
your
you.
stories and wisdom. And down the road, have you back on again. And
Thanks, Dan.
crazy all the connections and people that you run into. And like I just
Yeah,
had dinner with, yeah, a small group. We had like 8 of us at a table with Dr. Ken and his wife
nice.
and some others a
Uh-huh.
couple months ago. So it's funny
Nice.
that
Yeah.
you've also had a
Oh
intersection with
yeah.
him as well.
Oh yeah. We still keep in touch. Yeah.
So, how can people connect with you?
Okay.
Um,
The
and
best
then, oh,
way
go
to
ahead.
reach me is through my website, which is www.wellfedresources.com.
Perfect.
And there's a tab that says healing. And so that'll take you directly to book, workshop, etc.
Perfect. Very good. And then the next one is, you may know about the challenge, but I'd love for you to throw a challenge out for guys,
Ah,
for dads to do something that they can do this week. So in between this
okay.
podcast and the next podcast, it
Okay.
could be easy or it could be hard,
Okay.
but something
The
that they
challenge.
can do. So guys
Okay.
typically all or none, if I can't do
Okay.
all of it, then I'm not going to do any of it. But so
Okay.
something that's
Okay.
bite-sized enough, but it
Okay.
can be challenging,
Okay. Okay.
where that help
So,
them become a better, yeah, you got the concept. So roll with
okay, I
it.
do. Okay. So I would like them this week, no matter how many children they have, I would like them this week to spend at least 1 hour with each child, one on one, doing something that the child wants him to do with them. And
That
regardless of the age of the child, whether it's an adult child or
yes, yeah,
even if you got to FaceTime it, spend at least 1 hour this week with your child.
that's great. That's great. Picture that. Picture you right now with your, if your dad's alive and maybe he's out of town and your dad says, "Hey, could we, schedule an hour and just hang out with each other via Zoom or FaceTime or whatever." What? Where's this coming from?
That would be awesome.
That would be cool. That would be
Yeah,
cool. So, yeah, it's a neat thing to reach out to your kids in that way, or to have your own father reach out in that way, or go uphill with it. Reach
yeah,
out to your dad and
yeah,
spend some
yeah,
intentional time with your dad
yeah,
too. So,
absolutely.
just like my buddy who put his goals out there and then put his action plan together and then scheduled intentional time for all 12 months so that he can accomplish what he wants to accomplish, that intentional quality time with his family members and that one-on-one time. What a great challenge. And guys, look and see where your time is, and match
Yeah,
it up, and you know allow your kids to come up with an activity, or allow your dad to come up with an activity, as you spend time with them, something they want to do. So that's a great challenge. That's a fun challenge. That's a challenge that builds on itself
Yes,
because once you do it, you want to keep doing it.
that's right. That's right.
Mm.
That's awesome.
Well, God bless you,
God
Gigi.
bless you too, Dan.
I did
You
it.
got it. Awesome.
Well, thank you so, so much. And
Thank
yeah,
you.
guys, definitely check out her books, check out her website. And again, appreciate you coming on and down the road, looking forward to having you come on again.
That would be delightful. Thank you so much, Dan. You have a blessed day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.